Before we dive into building our Grunt script for our web application, it would be a great idea if we first open up this application and reviewed it, because we're going to be using this application and its underlying code throughout the rest of our demos. As you can see here, I have our application up on my browser. This is a very simple reminder application that's simply built for this recording. What I can do is I can do things like add a new reminder. And I could provide things like title, description, date, priority and frequency. Add it to our underlying list. What we're going to do is we're going to learn how we can take our TypeScript, which powers this application, and compile it down to JavaScript using the TypeScript Grunt plugin. Now that we are familiar with the application, let's go ahead and get started learning how we can use Grunt to package and prepare our application for use. Because the JavaScript for this site is written in TypeScript, which is a JavaScript superset, we're going to first learn how we can compile our TypeScript to JavaScript. If you're not familiar with TypeScript or you'd like to learn more about it, I would highly suggest that you watch Dan Walling's great course on TypeScript over at Pluralsight. As you can see here, Dan's got a great course. It's about 4.5 hours long. This will teach you everything you need to know to get up and running with TypeScript if you're not familiar with it. Just a second ago, I mentioned that we need to compile our TypeScript into JavaScript. This is very easily accomplished with Grunt, but I'd like to take that a step further. I want to be able to use Grunt to not only compile our TypeScript files, but also merge them into a single JavaScript file. Right now, our sample application has referenced each and every compiled JavaScript file. This is bad practice because it's bad for performance. In fact, if I look at our source here, you can see that in fact, every one of my JavaScript files are loaded one by one into our application. This is really bad because what I want to do is basically put this into one or two files and load them. This will increase performance. So let's go ahead and take a look at how we can do this. The first thing we're going to do is to download the Grunt TypeScript plugin in order to compile our TypeScript files to JavaScript. To do this, I'm just going to go ahead and install it via npm. We've now got our Grunt TypeScript plugin installed correctly. Let's go and bounce into our packages.json file to verify this. Here we are within our package.json file, and sure enough, you can see the Grunt TypeScript dev dependency has been added. This tells us that everything's been installed correctly. Now that we have everything installed, let's go ahead and get rocking and learn how to use it. So here we are within our Grunt file, and the first thing we want to do is go ahead and add our reference to our npm task of Grunt TypeScript. What we've done now is basically said, hey, you know what? We're going to load the npm task that we just installed, which is Grunt TypeScript. The next thing we want to do is create our default task or entry point into our Grunt script. Notice I gave this task the name of default. This is the first parameter. It's a good practice to always have default entry tasks. The next thing I want you to pay attention to is that I've already specified the TypeScript target that I want to run. Since we've already specified the TypeScript target to run, it'd be a great idea to go and implement this target now. What I've done is I pasted in some code. Let's go ahead and explore this a bit. What I just added was an entry point for our TypeScript plugin, and then I set up the options sections as well as a section called all. Inside of our all task, you'll notice I've set up an entry point which defines the source of our TypeScript files, which are going to be compiled. I've also specified a destination folder. What this setup will do is we'll take all the files underneath our JS folder and compile them into an individual JavaScript files underneath our output folder. Let's go ahead and give this a run and see this in action. So as you can see, I was able to run our Grunt script and have it compile our TypeScript files to JavaScript. Now I do have a bunch of TypeScript compilation errors, but those are all things dealing with our type definition files. We're not going to worry about those at this point in time. To validate that this actually worked, let's go and bounce into our output folder and see what happens. So here we are within our output folder. If I dive into this, you'll see that sure enough, all my individual TypeScript files were compiled to their individual JavaScript files. This shows that the TypeScript compiler via Grunt is working, but isn't doing what I want. Right now it's set up so that each TypeScript file is compiled to its own JavaScript file. What I want to be able to do is concatenate them so that I have, instead of many JavaScript files, maybe I have 3 or 4. So let's go ahead and figure out how we can do this with Grunt. So here we are back in our Grunt file. To achieve the results I'm looking for, what I want to do is replace our all task with 4 new ones. The new configuration above will allow me to output all of our TypeScript files for a given folder into a JS file. This works well for my needs because each of my folders is their own concern, and I like the idea of putting them all into their own file. Let's go and save our script and rerun it and see what happens. So our script is run without errors. Let's go ahead and look into our output folder to see if we now have our 4 newly created JavaScript files. So here we are within our output folder. And as you can see, I do have my 4 files. I have 1 binders, comments, models, and view models. This tells me that my Grunt script is set up correctly. The last thing I need to do is modify my solution so that I can use these new JavaScript files rather than each of my individual files. So to do this, I'm going to bounce into Visual Studio, which is where I built my application. So here we are within Visual Studio. I happen to build this application using ASP.NET MVC. If you don't use MVC, that's not a problem. The concepts are still the same. What I want to do is go ahead and remove the reference to all of our TypeScript bundlers. This is what will take each of our JS files and push them to the web. Replace them with the new line here, which says, basically take everything in our output folder that is of start.js and include that. So if I did everything correctly, I should be able to rerun our application and see that we're no longer referencing every JavaScript file, but instead just 4. So here we are back within our application. If I go ahead and hit F5, you'll see that no longer do I have each of my files referenced, but I just have the 4 individual files referenced, and my site does still work as expected. This tells me I'm able to combine all of our JavaScript files into a single few JavaScript files via the TypeScript Grunt plugin.